The family of four lived an ordinary life in an ordinary neighborhood. There was the father, John, the mother, Lisa, a teenage son named Jake, and a little daughter, Emily, who was still too young for school. Their life was filled with the usual ups and downs of daily routine, and they were content. One sunny afternoon, John decided to take Emily to the park. They spent the afternoon playing, with Emily running around and laughing as John watched her. While they were playing near the swings, Emily's eyes caught sight of a doll lying on the grass. It was a small, old-fashioned doll with porcelain skin, dressed in a tattered vintage dress. Emily was immediately drawn to it. "Daddy, look, a doll!" Emily exclaimed, picking it up. John hesitated. "Emily, that might belong to someone else. We shouldn't take things that aren't ours." "But Daddy, there's no one around, and I really like her. Please?" Emily's eyes welled up with tears, her little hands clutching the doll tightly. John looked around the empty park. There was indeed no one in sight. After a moment of consideration, he sighed. "All right, you can keep it. But remember, it's not nice to take things that don't belong to us." Emily beamed with joy and hugged the doll tightly. They returned home, and Emily ran inside to show her new treasure to the rest of the family. Jake, who was sitting on the couch playing video games, barely looked up, but when he finally did, a shiver ran down his spine. There was something off about that doll, something that made him uneasy. "That's a creepy-looking doll, Emily," Jake muttered, a frown on his face. "Where did you find it?" "In the park. Isn't she pretty?" Emily replied, her eyes shining with excitement. Jake shook his head. "It's just a doll," he muttered, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. That night, as the family went to bed, Jake found it difficult to sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind filled with unsettling thoughts. When he finally drifted off, his sleep was restless, and he woke up the next morning feeling drained and exhausted. This pattern continued for several days, and Jake's energy was sapped. He dismissed it as a bug or something he ate. One day, Jake invited his friend Mark over. Mark brought along his dog, Max. As they approached the house, Max began to bark furiously, refusing to go inside. No matter how much Mark and Jake tried to coax him, Max wouldn't cross the threshold. Instead, he stood there, growling and barking at the open door. "What's wrong with him?" Mark asked, puzzled. Jake shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe he smells something weird." Days passed, and the sense of unease in the house grew. One evening, the family was getting ready to go out, waiting for Jake to finish getting dressed. As Jake passed by Emily's room, he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The door was slightly ajar, and as he walked past, it creaked open further. He stopped, peeking inside. The room was in disarray, toys scattered everywhere. The doll was propped up against a pillow, its glassy eyes staring directly at him. For a moment, Jake felt as though the doll was watching him, its gaze heavy and penetrating. He stood there, frozen, as a wave of anxiety washed over him. "Jake, hurry up, we're leaving," his mother called from downstairs, snapping him out of his trance. Jake shook his head, trying to clear his mind. He quickly joined his family and they left the house. That night, Jake couldn't shake the memory of the doll's gaze. As he lay in bed, the room felt colder, the darkness seemed thicker. He drifted into an uneasy sleep and soon found himself in a nightmare. In his dream, he was alone in their house. The room stretched out endlessly, corridors twisting and turning into a labyrinth. As he wandered, calling out for his family, doors slammed shut behind him, and he could hear faint whispers echoing through the halls. Suddenly, a door creaked open behind him. He turned to see a tall, dark figure, at least 7 feet tall, standing in the doorway. Its presence was overwhelming, a shadowy silhouette with glowing red eyes. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as the figure moved silently into the room, its eyes never leaving his. With a sinister grin, it stepped aside to reveal his family, brutally torn apart and lifeless on the floor. The figure laughed, a deep, soulless sound that sent chills down Jake's spine. "You're next," it hissed, before lunging at him with terrifying speed. Jake awoke with a scream, drenched in sweat. He looked around, relieved to find himself back in his room. It had only been a nightmare, but the terror lingered. As he lay there, trying to calm his racing heart, he heard a noise from the closet. His breath caught in his throat. The house was silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across his room, illuminating the closet door. A foul odor filled the room, making Jake's stomach churn. He stared at the closet, his fear mounting. Was he still dreaming? The silence was oppressive, the air thick with tension. Then he heard it. 3 loud knocks coming from inside the closet. Jake's mind raced. Should he call out for his parents? Should he run? He tried to scream, but no sound came out. His body felt paralyzed, his muscles stiff with fear. He could only watch as the closet door slowly creaked open. Inside, sitting eerily upright, was Emily's doll. Its head slowly turned to face him, its eyes glinting in the moonlight. Jake's terror turned to anger. He got out of bed, determined to get rid of the doll once and for all. As he approached, the doll's head twisted 180 degrees and it floated out of the closet, hanging in midair. Jake froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm not afraid of you," he whispered, his voice trembling. A sudden, searing pain shot through his shoulder. He felt hot breath on the back of his neck, and the same rancid smell from his nightmare filled the air. He couldn't bring himself to turn around. The same cold, menacing voice from his dream whispered in his ear, "I'll kill you all, starting with you." Jake's body trembled with fear, his mind screaming for him to run, but his legs refused to move. He closed his eyes, trying to muster the courage to fight back, to scream, to do anything. Then, everything went dark. Jake woke up to find his parents standing over him, their faces filled with concern. "Jake, honey, are you all right?" His mother asked, her voice trembling. "You were screaming in your sleep. We couldn't wake you." Jake sat up, his heart still racing. "It was just a nightmare," he said, trying to convince himself as much as his parents. "Just a bad dream." His parents looked at each other, worry etched on their faces. They left him alone to collect himself. Jake lay back down, staring at the ceiling, the images from his dream still vivid in his mind. He tried to shake off the fear, telling himself it was all just his imagination. But deep down, he knew something was very, very wrong.